Alright, so here's our black unnamed protagonist in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, who is not invisible in real life, but is invisible because people refuse to see him. So what happens sometimes, well, he'll be walking down and people will bump into him and randomly say, call him bad words, so he gets angry and beats them up and knees them repeatedly in the stomach and then kicks them down to the ground and then keeps brutally kicking them as the person begs for help, not really knowing what's going on because, of course, the guy's kind of invisible, so he doesn't realize what's happening. So the guy realizes that he doesn't really know that he's invisible. So instead of killing him, he just lets him go and, catches his breath for a second as this guy's writhing in pain and starts laughing about how this guy probably thinks that he just got beat up by a ghost, and then walks away back to his dark room cave that's kind of ambiguous and vague, fabulously, like a boss, as you can see. So he's in his cave, pondering, and then decides to tell us about how he hates the dark and how he steals energy from a company and they have no clue where it's going, but he uses all this electricity and energy to put up these LED lights, as you can see, and he puts a lot of them up. But then he also sits down and listens to Louis Armstrong on the radio as he decides to tell us about how he got to here and why he's invisible. So it starts off when talking about his dead grandpa and how his grandpa gave him this weird advice on going against society and yesing all the white people to death, and how constantly telling them yes will lead them to their own destruction because they don't know what's really good for them. But he was kind of a little kid and he was scared about this for some reason, but he decided not to follow it. But then he gets into this, goes to this program because he is good at writing speeches, but instead they actually put him in these boxing gloves and blindfold him with all these other black people, because remember, he's a black protagonist, and they blindfold him and put him in this ring and tell everyone to start beating each other up, and he's scared, doesn't really know what he's going to do. Which comes to our first theme, as not everything is as it seems, because he thought he was just going to go here to write a speech, but ended up being part of this cruel entertainment for all these rich white guys, and they keep beating him up. And this theme is probably the most concurrent one and keeps appearing back through the book. But he does end up actually, after his beating, he goes, does a speech and gets a scholarship to this university down south, and gets a job as a driver for one of the partners. And the partner tells him to drive him somewhere off campus. So he goes out where all the black people live, and there's this old guy, and he decides to talk to them for some reason. And he tells them about how he raped his daughter and wife and got them both pregnant, and how he was shunned by society. And this kind of just surprises this partner into going into basically kind of like a coma for like a little bit, which, gets everyone in the college mad at the guy after the speech. So then eventually he gets in trouble and he has to sit down with one of the reverends and directors, and eventually after a fight gets expelled. As you can see here, he's not very happy and he expels him. So he decides, he's going to leave, and he has to go to New York to get a job, which starts up our next theme, which is talking about how all opportunities require sacrifice. And as you'll see later in our story, if he never left college and if he never sacrificed and left school and went to New York, he never would have gotten the successful career that he eventually receives. So he actually starts trying to look for jobs, giving these letter of recommendations that he received from that director that told him that he's expelled. But it turns out that these recommendations were actually not very good, and telling no one to give him a job, which comes back to our theme of, things are not as they seem. So he gets his job at this factory where he starts working in the basement with an engineer, and the engineer is a crazy old black guy who who thinks that he's working for the union. So he gets mad at him, and they start getting into another fight, and the guy starts beating him with this big metal pole, or wooden stick as we interpreted it here. Not the same bystander as in the beginning, but definitely they get into this big fight. But the thing is, during the fight, the whole time they're supposed to be watching these pipes, because if they don't watch them, the pipes could explode. But they don't really realize this, so they're fighting it out for a long time here as this guy's trying to explain that he's not part of the union, but the old black guy is really angry and bites the guy in the chest, so which he thinks is a knife, but it's not. But they eventually stop fighting, and then the engineer realizes that they weren't watching the pipes and that they're about to explode. So he tells them to go over there and check the pipes, and then he kind of runs off laughing at the guy because he's about to, explode. It's really kind of Schadenfreude-like. So our black protagonist, still unnamed, is about to almost die because of this factory explosion that's happening, and after the explosion he gets taken to a hospital because he got hurt a lot. And the hospital, for some reason, it really doesn't tell you why, but they hook him up to this machine and they start electrocuting him, trying to make him not able to be angry anymore. It's a really traumatizing experience that's confusing. Again, not everything is as it seems. And which gets brought into he's walking home on the street corner. He talks to this guy who's selling yams, and the guy tells him that these yams are good, but not everything is as it seems, but these yams are as good as they seem, and they are. And then he finds this apartment with this really nice old black lady called Mary, and she he tries to pay her when he can, but she tells him no, and that she doesn't really want his money, and that she wants to just help him, and she becomes like a big mother figure for him, until he goes out and sees this raid happen. There's some eviction happening, and decides, and all these people that are about to beat up on the cops because of the raid, and decides to make a speech, which just makes the people rally up even more. So he has to run away from the cops now. So he's running on top of rooftops, trying to get away from these cops, and there's some guy following him, and he thinks that the guy's a cop, but after he jumps down, he realizes that the guy was actually part of this organization, and the organization offers him money with a $300 per an hour raise and all that. And it turns out they want him to write speeches for him because they saw his awesome speech that he did. So he accepts them, and he goes to this party, and he realizes that they're actually a communist organization, but I guess he just wants a job, and he just wants to be able to write speeches. And they have some good causes, so he decides to pursue this career for writing speeches. And most of the book talks about his new career and how he becomes really famous in Harlem as an awesome speechwriter for all these communist rallies. And he starts getting too popular, and all the other people kind of get jealous, so they get really mad at him because they think that he's trying to take up everything. So they kind of just not fire him, but they redistrict him. And
can you save that and then just delete the parts that you messed up on? Videos out of order.
Yeah. So then we go to more themes. How it talks about how you can't really control life because he thought he was just going to be this awesome college student, but then ended up making all these speeches and became a speech maker. And then he realizes that he doesn't like the communist organization anymore, and he realizes he's going to follow his grandfather's words about yesing them to death. So then he just follows everything that they're doing and says yes, and they just kind of ruin everything. And with that, some things just start going downhill as they start getting in arguments. And because of that, one of his friends gets killed by a cop, and the cop, which is now who used to be our black protagonist, they kind of switch right there, shoots his friend down, which is a really sad moment for him as his friend's there, shot in the head, dead, which causes more rioting because it's problems because they now say, innocent black guy was killed by a cop for no reason. And he holds this funeral for the... So then, and then it kind of goes to another theme about how there's two sides to every argument, and how there's this guy who betrayed the communist organization and his side, and then there's a communist organization side to the argument, and how during the whole thing everything has two sides, from the person that expelled him to him being expelled to the guy in the factory, and everything has two sides to every argument. So after his funeral, people, he's really sad, and he tries to give another speech to people, but doesn't really work out, and he tells them to kind of gets them angry in the wrong way, and then all these riots start happening, and they start burning things down, and there's fires all over Harlem, and more explosions, and more people dying, and everything's going bad. And he realizes that the communist organization did this on purpose because he kind of sacrificed Harlem. And there's this guy in this weird African warrior costume and trying to like kill all these police, and buildings are being burned, and during there's a lot of gang violence, and then he gets chased by these people of this separate organization from this kind of like black power gang that hates white people and hates his communist organization for having white people and black people in it. And that's when he actually falls in a ditch with this coal mining, with there's all this coal inside of a hole, kind of underground, and he can't get out. And he kind of ponders about his life and ponders about how throughout his life he's constantly becoming a different person, constantly changing, which brings us to our last theme about how throughout life you're always basically changing who you are. No one is ever the same person that they are. Like you from 10 years ago is not the same person you are now. And then he decides to live in this ditch forever. And that's the end of our story, where he comes back to normal, how he realizes he's an invisible man.